Alright, welcome everybody. So this is lesson 9.4 and we're going to be splitting this up into 4 different parts because in class when we were to teach this we would be actually teaching you guys 4 different sections. Okay, so first section is going to be detailing what's called the square root property. So what you guys are going to do is we are solving a quadratic where it is x squared equals n. And so what happens is that we got to simplify x squared. Well, the best way to simplify x squared, if you guys remember, if I wanted to get it by itself, so if I had x squared right here, the best way to simplify it or reduce it would be to take the square root of it. And if you do that, you get x. Okay, but the problem with that is that we have to make sure the other side of the equation, so right here, when you take the square root, it's going to be a plus or minus, because when we're talking about a parabola now with a quadratic, usually when you guys graph these, or when you've seen a picture of a graph, it's got 2 answers. So that's what we're shooting for today, is finding those 2 answers. So let's begin. So what we're going to do is use the square root property. So over the top of these are simple setups where they're already kind of set up for you. Some of them are, but some of them aren't as we progress through letters C and D. Alright, first thing you want to do is we're going to solve this. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. And when we do that, we'll actually, the square root will cancel out the squared part right here. So we know this would be x minus 7 equals the square root of 36. And the square root of 36 is what number? Ladies and gentlemen, it is 6. Alright, so now one thing we have to do though is, if you remember this rule right here, is that it has to be what? Plus or minus. So we go back here and we add a little plus or minus. So what this actually means is there are now 2 equations here. Alright, so our first one is going to be, x minus 7, and it's going to equal 6, and then our other equation is going to be x minus 7, because that doesn't change, but it does equal the negative 6. Okay, and now you simplify. So as we've gone through this process in the past, this is a simple equation where you would add 7 to both sides, and that goes to everything involved here. And then you solve, right? So this would be x equals 6 plus 7 is 13. Simple enough, right? So this one here would be x equals a positive 1, because you have a 7 and negative 6. Remember, if you're going to the store and you spend $6 but you have 7, how many do you actually have left? You have $1 left. So you remember that aspect. Next one. Okay, so we're going to solve this using square root form. So we take the square root of both sides. So this simplifies straight up to be x plus 9 equals the square root of 8. Okay, now from here, and we can't forget the little beginning part, which would be plus or minus. So now what we got to do is we're going to simplify this square root of 8 part. So if you guys remember harkening back to before spring break when we had radicals, can you simplify or reduce square root of 8? And the answer is yes. Okay, so remember what we're looking for here. All right, we are looking for square roots. So a perfect square would be a 4. Square root of 9 would be 3. Square root of 16 would be what? It'd be 4, right? So can you take a 4, 9, or 16 out of 8? The answer is you could take a 4, right? So you could split this up to be square root of 4 times the square root of 2. And you can actually solve that square root of 4, if you guys remember, to 2. Because that's what we have right here. So it's 2 and the square root of 2. Sweet. So that's going to be plus or minus equals x plus 9. Alright, now you got to split it. We've simplified as much as possible. So now we have x plus 9 equals 2 square root of 2. And then we also have x plus 9 equals the negative 2 square root of 2. Alright, and so what this does is now we're going to simplify, subtract 9 from both sides. And then the real question is, ladies and gentlemen, can we go any further? The answer is no. Okay, so when you solve this, it's going to be x equals, and it'd be 2 square root of 2 minus 9. Can you reduce that any farther? Nope. You're done. That's your answer. And then here it would be x equals 2 square root of 2, and then this is going to be negative, sorry, minus 9. So there are your 2 answers. Okay, so you have a positive 2 times the square root of 2 minus 9, and a negative 2 square root of 2 minus 9. Now what happens is that if we were to graph this in Desmos or any other graphing calculator, you would actually get a decimal, a pretty gnarly looking one. And so what this is this is the approximation or the square root value that we want you guys to have. This is what's going to ask you in ALEKS. This is going to ask you next year, and then the years beyond when you take Algebra 2 and into pre-calculus and calculus. Okay, you're going to have square root answers just like this. Now, if you want the real number, you could type it in 2 times the square root of 2, and then you would get a decimal point. You'd get 2 point something, 2.1, and then it would go on forever. And then you could subtract it from 9, and then you'd have that number, and that would be the technical answer. But we're looking for an answer that would be left in square root terms here. Okay, first thing you want to do on this side now is before the square root is you got to get everything on one side. So let's subtract by 7. Okay, and then when you do that, you get x plus 5 squared equals 21. Alright, now we're going to take the square root since this is by itself, and you can simplify this, right? So square root of this, square root of that. This can be simplified again to x plus 5, and it's going to equal plus or minus the square root of 21, because we're looking for two answers, because that's what the square root property talks about. Now, here's the issue is, can you solve this? The answer is no. You can't. You can't take a 4 or a 9 or a 16 out of 21. Alright, so what you do is now we're going to solve by subtracting 5 from both sides. And here's my answer. X equals plus or minus square root of 21 minus 5. Now, here's where I want to make sure you guys understand. This is actually two answers. So I wrote it like this. This would usually be an acceptable answer, but understand that it means x equals square root of 21, and then it's minus 5 separate. I'm writing a big gap here so you guys understand it's not square root of 21 minus 5 all together. Okay, it's square root of 21 minus 5. And then this one here, it would be, so I'll change color so you guys can see the difference. It would be x equals negative 20, it'd be x equals negative square root of 21, and then it's minus 5. Okay, so if you don't like the fact that there's the minus 5 in the front or in the back, you could put it in the front. So it'd be negative 5 plus 21 square root of 21, or it'd be negative 5 minus the square root of 21. Okay, hopefully you guys understand that you can switch these around, but that's your answer. Okay, if ALEKS accepts this form, you can use it. Algebra 2, you'll be using that form quite a bit, but just know that it's two answers. Okay, the next one, the last one, is d squared, and then it's going to be equals, and that is going to be 44. Okay, and now you need to take the square root of both sides, and then you'd have d equals the square root of 44. So what you have to ask yourself, and it's plus or minus, is can you take a 4, 9, or 16 out of 44? The answer is yes, you can take a 4. So this can be split square root of 4 times the square root of 11, and then you can simplify it down to this term right here equals d. And this, ladies and gentlemen, once again, let me give it a different color, would be an acceptable answer. So let me do this again, square root of 11, and it's going to be plus or minus, and it's d equals. Okay, so hopefully you guys understand this process, and you guys can figure out how to do the square root property. Okay, this is two answers. If you were to put it in a calculator, you'd get a decimal. That's what you're shooting for. Alright, so what I want you guys to do now is try this on your own. Use the square root property, solve if you have to. Like on this one here, you'd have to add 3 to both sides first. Okay, and then you can solve it. This one here, you have to do something to this before you solve it. Pause the video and you guys try. Alright, so hopefully you guys come back to me and you've done the work, and just double check your answers real quick to see if you got it. You can fast forward the video at any time. There's nothing saying you have to watch this thing the entire time. Matter of fact, if I knew I was confident in my abilities, I would skip through all of this and see if I match up my answers, and if you do, you're done. Then you move on, right? If you don't, if you miss something, then you can back it up and figure out where I did the work, and then you guys could solve or figure out your mistake at that point. Alright, now we have this set up here. It's going to be minus 6 minus 6 to both sides, and then you guys would solve this accordingly, and you'd end up with x equals 3 on this side, and then this side's going to be x equals negative 15 over here. This one here, after you add the 3, it's x minus 8 squared equals 13, right? So now you take the square root of both sides. Alright, then can you, sorry I blocked off that, so that'd be x minus 8 equals plus or minus square root of 13. Can you solve that? The answer is no, you can't. Okay, so you can simply add 8 to both sides, and then you'd be done. So it could be x equals plus or minus the square root of 13 plus 8, right? So that's your answer right there. Hopefully you guys can understand that there are actually two answers there, not just one, and then we'll go from there. Alright, the other one here, this would be divide by 4 to simplify it first, and then you would end up with m plus 1 squared equals 9. Now you can take the square root of both sides. The reason we want to get rid of the square root is we're trying to isolate the letter m all by itself. Okay, so this would be m plus 1 equals, and the square root of 9 is 3, so let's plus or minus, whoops, not the square root. Almost did what some of you guys do to me all the time, because the square root of 9 is 3, so then you can solve it, right? So let's split this in two. So it's m plus 1 equals 3, and then it's m plus 1 equals negative 3. Then you solve accordingly. Right, so you get m equals negative 4 and m equals 2. Alright, and then the last one is a pretty simple setup where you just take the square root because it's already set up for you, but then you have to figure out if you can split 72 up. And the answer is, of course, yes. Okay, you have the square root of 9 times 8. Okay, that's what I know off the top of my head, right? But you can actually do this, so we'll solve this, so it'd be 3 times the square root of 8. But remember from the earlier exercise, you can actually do the square root of 8 as well. So you would take the square root of 8 can be broken down into 4 times the square root of 2. So you can take that down one more time. So what you would end up being here is, you'd have 3 times 2 times the square root of 2, right? So this would be 6. Alright, so that's your answer set up there. And then it's going to be m equals plus or minus 6 times the square root of 2. Okay, how many of you guys knew that 36 times 2 is in fact 72? I didn't off the top of my head. So what you do is you got to use this math here to kind of simplify it as you go down. So hopefully you guys see the process of how this goes to here, and then how we take everything down from there. How the 8 would shift down, and this would shift down to here. So you'd have the 3 come down here, and it'd be 3 times 2 times the square root of 2. Okay. If you have any questions, ask your teachers, okay, or shoot me an email on Remind, or join me in my office hours. Okay, the last piece here is a word problem. This is mainly what you guys will see. Okay, a ball dropped from a height of 205 feet. So what we're going to do is find out the time it takes for the ball to reach the ground. All right, so h is going to equal 0 because that's what time it wants to hit the ground, and then it's going to be negative 16 t squared, and it's going to be plus our initial height, which is 205. All right, now we're going to solve. We're going to solve for t squared. We're going to get all by itself. That's our main goal, is to get t squared all by itself. So the first thing would be to subtract 205. Okay, and if you subtract 205, you'd get negative 205 equals negative 16 t squared. Now you got to get rid of that negative 16. So let's get rid of this. Okay, and if you put it in a calculator, it would come out to be t squared equals, and now I'm writing it this way, 12.8125. Okay, I have it written down over on the left because that's a little difficult math even for me to try to do in my brain. Okay, now that you have this solved out, and sorry it looks bad, you guys can see, so let me write it out one more time. T squared equals 12.8125. Okay, you guys can now tell you take the square root. So you take square root of here, square root of this, and you'd have t equals plus or minus the square root of 12.8125. Now on this particular example, I would want to have a real number. You're not, and it wants to be in seconds, right? The number of seconds it takes to hit the ground. You're not talking about negative seconds. There's no such thing as that. So it's only the positive number. So I would actually want you to put in the calculator what the t is, and you'd come up with t equals approximately 3.6 seconds. Okay, that is when you put that in the calculator. Now you'll also get a negative 3.6, but does that make sense? The answer, of course, is no, it doesn't. All right, and then the last example for this video is find out when the ball is half that height. So what I want you guys to do is go back in, use the formula from the previous exercise, start here, and it's half the height. Okay, go. Okay, hopefully you guys did this on your own. Half the height would be negative 102.5, and that's going to equal negative 16t squared. Once again then, you would want to divide both sides by negative 16. Alright, and then when you do that, you'd end up with a positive number here of 6.4. We'll go 0.6 equals t squared. Now you're going to take the square root, and once again, remember it's going to be plus or minus setup. We're only looking for the positive. So you put this in a calculator and you get t is approximately, let me make sure I use the right one, 2.5 seconds. Okay. Alright, so that's it for part one. This is about using the square root. On the homework, you're going to have it as well. We're not going to split the homework into 4 sections, but just understand, ladies and gentlemen, when asked to do the square root property, this is how you do it. Go ahead and get ready to watch part 2. Good luck, and I know you guys will succeed.